In the annual report that Amnesty International has released today, which is a study of 159 countries, we have discerned, we've uncovered, it's not difficult, a trend towards very divisive rhetoric in 2016. This report is about 2016. A narrative of us and them, a kind of dichotomy of us and them that has done a number of things. It has shifted a political spectrum of what is acceptable. It has created a rollback on observance and adherence to human rights on a global scale. It's exacerbated the us and them rhetoric that I think you're referring to in a number of countries. You mentioned Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump came into power at the end of 2016, so this doesn't really look at what he's been doing in 2017, but it looks at certainly
during 2016.
Certainly during absolutely, and it does look at some of the talks that his rhetoric in terms of the campaign. He talked about bringing back waterboarding. But there were other leaders as well. You know, when a big state like the United States, in its main political discourse, has this kind of rhetoric, has this kind of narrative, then we see, for example, the kind of anti-immigrant, anti-refugee narrative unleashed in Britain, in France, you know, in terms of the rise of the National Front, you know, the discourse that's being used there, and actually more generally, and indeed in other states, in Prime Minister, soon to be President Erdogan in Turkey, and the recently elected president in the Philippines, Duterte, as well. The kind of the dialectic that he's used about drug offenders, you know, so the Nazis exterminated, you know, Jews at millions upon millions. Well, we have millions upon millions of drug users that we're going to eliminate. And this is kind of a global rollback, I think, that we're seeing, that stems from this very corrosive, very caustic discourse that we're seeing. I mean, Amnesty International is a human rights organization, as you know, and you know, we look at adherence to human rights standards. I think what emerges from the main country studies. I mean, as I say, it's a study of 159 countries. But what struck me when I reviewed it, in broad terms, was that this rollback of adherence to human rights standards in respect to freedom of expression, in respect to freedom of association, and so on, and this divisive, corrosive us and them rhetoric, it seems to stem from an inability and a failure, more generally, by states to provide an adequate space to address economic rights issues. The fundamental underlying tradition, underlying issues that seem to come out appear rooted in a failure to protect economic rights by so many people, by you know, amongst those people who then engaged in this divisive rhetoric. So I think, as I say, Amnesty is not an economic sort of socio-economic organization in that sense, but certainly what comes through in the debates and the discourse that we have analyzed and how that's used by Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and others, a great many others indeed, is this failure to protect the economic rights debate that would promote better, sounder ways to address these issues And the failure to address those issues has created or contributed to the creation of this us and them discourse, the us and them narrative, the kind of narrative that, oh, they're coming over here, they're going to take our jobs. They are, that Muslims are dangerous, that Jews are unwanted, that, they need to be shown their place and so on. And it strikes me, again, from a human rights perspective, a kind of rights-based analysis, a rights-based approach would be that if that area of debate is protected and facilitated, then in our view, the outcomes are better. If you enable poor people, less educated people in every state to have a voice, to have their voice heard, and for them to engage in a national discussion, a national debate, be it in America, in the United States, in Canada, wherever, the outcome tends to be a sounder, more rounder, a more inclusive, and I think that's the key word, inclusive, an inclusive outcome. And I think that's why one of the key calls, I think what we're really getting at in the report, I think one of the things that I take away from this report is this call for global solidarity, is a call for people to come together, in response to a paralyzed UN Security Council, in response to 36 countries sending back refugees, violating human rights law. We see that in some countries. There's some indications that people are coming together to fight the rollback, to fight a kind of degradation of the human rights standards, and that's encouraging. And I think it's not a tradition, it's not a trend that I've seen globally in the years, decade plus that I've been working at Amnesty International, to see this kind of global movement to fight an us and them rhetoric everywhere from, East Asia to Latin America. So I think that's one of the key takeaways. When I speak to my colleagues in Amnesty International sections in Europe, in parts of Asia and so on, in the United States, they are afraid, gravely concerned that this us and them rhetoric, and a rhetoric of rolling back on human rights, will continue. And I think what we've seen here in the UK, and indeed we're seeing it in other countries too, is an attempt by the people, a grassroots effort, to say it's not acceptable. Look, I think there are some positive signs in unexpected places. I'll take Kuwait as an example. It seems to me that after the election, the last parliamentary election in Kuwait, for example, there are a number of parliamentarians who have been elected from previously marginalized communities have benefited from a discourse of inclusiveness. And now we're seeing in Kuwaiti Parliament some debates and proposals put forward that would strengthen inclusiveness and greater, a greater observance and adherence to human rights. So I think there are some bright spots, or I'm saying bright spots, there are encouraging signs. And sadly, I think most of them come from what are now minority voices, and more to the point, grassroots people, grassroots communities, grassroots organizations. I mean, in Canada, for example, the government has opted for a policy whereby individual communities and individual groups can adopt and pay for refugee communities. So you have communities in the far north of Canada. I'm Canadian, so this is something that I know a little bit more about. From Whitehorse and Yellowknife in the far north of Canada, where it's now it's like -20, -30, sponsoring families from Damascus, from Aleppo and other places where it's not normally -15, but they're being received and taken in by communities, and I think like I said, I think the takeaway that I come away with from some of these country entries that I've been looking at is the power of people, is the kind of solidarity message. I don't think it's explicit, because it's an analytical report. But what I'm taking away is, the people in Iran, in Iraq, people coming together to oppose this divisive narrative that we're seeing, that we're really, really concerned about going forward into 2017. I wouldn't want to be sitting here, or one of my colleagues to be sitting here in a year's time to say, actually, we saw it coming and we couldn't do anything about it. No, because we can do something about it, and we should be doing something about it. The human rights argument that we make, in a context where somebody like Donald Trump, the President of the United States, says, oh, all you media are liars, all you media are publishing fake news. I mean, thank goodness, in a way, we have other political leaders in other parts of the world who say, well, actually, a free press, irrespective of their political orientation, is a necessary component of a free or aspiring to be free society. The ability of a news agency, irrespective of its stripe, to be able to say that's wrong or that's right, or I factually checked this and it's wrong, that's essential. We need the press. We need people like you in your organizations to expose, to stand up and say, well, actually, we've looked at that too, and that's not true. And we need communities, and just to use the Kuwait example again, a great many human rights NGOs in Kuwait who are able to say, well, actually, we've looked at that and said, well, no, actually, the Badoon are subject to such and such position, or migrant workers are subject to such and such conditions. Or in the United States of America, no, Sweden didn't do that. No, it wasn't that way. And and also to say, well, why haven't you said anything about the attack by somebody of a very right wing, let's say, political persuasion against Muslims in Montreal, in Canada? Why is there no speaking out about that? So again, I guess I want to come back to that argument that freedom of expression, which some states, the United States.
What do you recommend to do?
Well, again, this is my own takeaway from the report. Is it's about solidarity. It's about, I think, about enabling more and more people of all shapes, sizes, color, class, background, for them to be able to have a voice, and for the community of voices, the grassroots people, to be able to express themselves and to call out politicians when they think they're lying, to fact check. To fact check these people, irrespective of who they are, wherever they are, whatever the political. This is not a political thing. This is about basic, fundamental human rights that I think we, the people, need to come together to oppose this wave that is diminishing our human rights. And when I say our, I mean you, mine, yours, your viewers, your listeners. It's corrosive, it's caustic, and it's dangerous. And luckily there are some, as I said, some bright spots. Some of those bright spots do arise from grassroots action. Some of them do arise from more measured, considered political discourse, which luckily we do have in the world in places. And we need to kind of reclaim that.